before the roar of armies, before the rise of empires. There was silence, a vast, breathing silence that stretched across the valleys of the Yellow River, the cradle of what would one day become China. Here, thousands of years before the first dynasty etched its mark into history, the world moved slowly. The rhythm of life was measured not by conquest, but by the seasons, by rain and drought, by flood and harvest. Imagine it. The soft rustle of wind through millet stalks, the dull gleam of water pooled and hand-dug irrigation ditches, the smoke of cooking fires curling into the evening air. Life was fragile, yet steady. A balance between endurance and acceptance. In this quiet world, people were not yet Chinese, not yet bound by empire or law. They were farmers, potters, and dreamers, building a rhythm of existence from the soil beneath their feet. Tonight, we return to that stillness, to a time before walls and wars, when the greatest threat was not invasion, but the whims of the river, when faith was woven into the earth itself. This is the lost piece of ancient China's silent farmers. If you're new here, welcome to this channel, where we drift through time at thespeedofthought.com. Curious and unheard. If you'd like to journey with us again through more forgotten corners of the past, take a moment to subscribe, settle in, dim the lights, and let's begin where all stories begin, in the fields. Imagine the wind moving softly through a wide valley. A valley not yet divided by borders or marked by cities. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth, and the sky above you shifts between pale gray and muted gold. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, speckled with stones and broken stalks of millet. It is the Neolithic world of northern China, thousands of years before the first emperor, before writing, before silk. It is a world built entirely on human hands, on patience, and on an intimate understanding of the land. An understanding that came not from choice, but from need. Here, the earliest farmers rose before dawn. The first sound was often the low hum of the wind moving through the reeds that lined the Yellow River, followed by the soft clatter of pots and tools. There was no clock, no rooster's cry, only the faint change of light. Men and women wrapped in coarse hemp cloth stepped from their pit dwellings, the cold of the earth still clinging to their skin. The huts were simple, half buried in the soil to keep warmth from escaping, their roofs bound with straw and reeds, smoke seeping through cracks like breath. The day began with silence, the kind of silence that felt alive, full of small movements and distant sounds. The whisper of the river, the shuffling of feet, the dry rattle of millet stalks in the breeze. They ate little in the mornings, sometimes only a handful of grain soaked overnight, sometimes nothing at all. Food was too precious to waste. Then, tools in hand, they walked toward the fields. The fields were not neat squares, not the orderly rows we might imagine today. They were patches of rough soil, cleared by hand, shaped by trial and error. A few families shared each section, their boundaries marked not by fences, but by memory. The soil was soft, but unpredictable, rich with silt after the floods, barren after drought. The Yellow River, the great giver of life, was also its most relentless destroyer. Too much rain and everything would drown. Too little, and the earth would crack like pottery under the sun. They worked slowly. There was no other way. The tools were primitive, wooden plows edged with stone, spades carved from bone, baskets woven from reeds. The men broke the ground, while the women planted seeds and tended the small fires that smoked along the edges of the fields to keep insects away. Children followed, scattering millet or gathering water from the shallow ditches that cut across the earth. Their hands were small and quick, their laughter rare. Work left little room for childhood. By midday, the heat could be unbearable. The air shimmered, and dust clung to every inch of skin. The farmers paused only briefly, long enough to sip water, sometimes brackish, sometimes sweet, depending on the season. They did not speak much. Words were saved for the evenings, when the work was done, when the body had no more strength to waste. Communication during the day came through gestures, a glance, a nod, the rhythm of shared labor. The river itself was both beautiful and terrifying. It wound through the land like a great yellow serpent, its waters thick with silt, its current unpredictable. It could vanish into quiet calm and then, without warning, rise in fury, tearing through the villages with a sound like thunder. Entire fields could disappear overnight. Homes would be swallowed, the earth reshaped. And when the waters receded, silence would return again. But never the same silence as before. It was a silence heavy with loss, but also with resignation. To survive meant to rebuild. Always to rebuild. Each flood was followed by another season of labor. Digging, mending, The farmers learned to adapt. They built dikes of mud and straw, carved channels to guide the water, shaped new fields wherever the earth allowed it. They became quiet engineers, though they would never use that word. To them, it was not innovation. It was simply living. Their diet was plain. Millet grail sometimes boiled with bits of bean or wild greens. Meat was a rarity, reserved for the luckiest days or the bleakest ones, when a hunt was successful or when hunger left no choice but to slaughter a goat or pig. Salt was precious. Oil was nearly unknown. And yet, there was a rhythm in the way they ate. Small bowls, passed from hand to hand, shared among family members who sat close to the fire. Children leaned against their mother's knees. Older men stared into the flames. No one hurried. Meals were moments of stillness, the only kind of peace they knew. At night, the sky stretched endlessly overhead, unbroken, filled with stars that shimmered in the dark like scattered grain. The air grew colder, and the sound of insects faded into the soft crackle of firewood. The people told stories, then slow, repetitive tales of ancestors who had tamed rivers or spoken to spirits. They believed the earth itself was alive, that the wind carried the voices of those who had come before. Sometimes they made small offerings, bits of grain, a drop of wine, the feather of a bird, laid gently in the dirt, as a way of saying thank you to the unseen. These early farmers lived in a world that asked everything from them, and gave back just enough to survive. Their hands were calloused, their backs bent, but they knew the land in ways we no longer can. They could read the river's moods by its color, predict a storm by the movement of clouds, sense the coming of frost in the stillness of dawn. Their wisdom was quiet, wordless, born of necessity. But make no mistake, life was harsh. Famine was not a distant threat, but a regular visitor. A bad season could wipe out a village. Children often did not survive the winters. Diseases came and went with the insects and the rains. And yet, in the midst of this endless struggle, there was persistence, a kind of faith not in gods or rulers, but in the simple act of continuing, planting again, even when the last harvest had failed, lighting a fire, even when the wind threatened to snuff it out. When you imagine them, the silent farmers of the Neolithic world, do not imagine despair. Imagine resilience, the quiet, unspoken courage of those who endured. For it was from their toil, their patience, and their stubborn hope that everything else would one day grow. Villages, cities, dynasties, empires. The hum of civilization began not in the courts of kings, but in the low murmur of farmers kneeling in the mud, whispering to the soil. And as the centuries drifted by, their scattered homes began to cluster. Fields grew wider. The smoke of one hearth could be seen from another. The first hints of something larger, community, began to take shape. The river that once separated became a thread that connected. Soon, the Yellow River would give birth to more than floods and famine. It would give birth to culture, to ritual, to the first outlines of identity. And so, we move forward, from the solitude of the farmer to the gathering of the village. From silence to the beginning of civilization itself. The seasons dictated everything. There were no calendars, no written records to mark time, only the slow rotation of the sun, the rise and fall of the river, the greening of grass after rain. The people of the valley learned to watch the world closely. They knew when the willows would bud, when the wild geese would return, and when the air itself began to taste of dust, a sign that the dry season was near. In their lives, observation was survival. A single mistake, planting too early or too late, could mean hunger for an entire year. Each month carried its own rhythm of labor. In spring, the ground soft, and they turned the earth with sharpened sticks and wooden plows pulled by hand. The soil smelled rich, then almost sweet, and the sound of water trickling from the river filled the air. In summer, the crops demanded constant attention, weeding, tending, and guarding against animals that crept in at night to eat what little food there was. Autumn brought harvests, a time both of relief and of quiet anxiety, for they never knew if the yield would be enough. And then came winter, long, gray, and still, when the fields lay bare and the wind swept cold through the valley. Winter was a season of endurance. The farmers gathered inside their pit homes, wrapping themselves in woven mats and animal skins. Smoke curled lazily upward from the fire pits, coating the ceilings with soot. They told stories to pass the endless nights, their words mingling with the pop of wood and the distant howl of wind. Some of these stories were of creation, of spirits who shaped the land, of ancestors who rose from the river mud. Others were lessons, passed down in whispers: how to store grain against rats, how to seal jars against mold, how to know when the river would rise again. Each tale was a fragment of inherited wisdom, small, precious, and vital. But even within these moments of stillness, there was unease. Hunger lingered like a quiet companion. They measured their stores carefully, counting each jar, each handful of dried millet. The fear of famine was not abstract. It was memory. They remembered the years when the rains came too soon, when the river burst its banks and carried the harvest away. They remembered the opposite too, when the sun burned too long, when cracks split the ground and the crops withered before their eyes. There was no comfort in predictability, only in endurance. Sometimes, when the sky darkened and the first drops of heavy rain fell, they would pause their work and look upward, feeling both awe and dread. They had no word for climate, only the lived experience of nature's moods. The Yellow River could change everything in a single night. Families would wake to find water already seeping into their homes, their belongings floating in silence. They salvaged what they could: tools, pottery, a bundle of grain tied in haste. The rest was left to the current. When the waters retreated, they would return to the muddy remains of their homes and begin again, shaping new dwellings from the same wet earth that had destroyed the old. In these moments, faith became necessity. They buried offerings by the riverbank, bowls filled with millet, fragments of bone, sometimes the figurine of a human or animal, shaped roughly from clay. They believed the spirits of the river demanded respect, that the floods were not merely natural but divine reminders of balance. When the waters were calm, they whispered gratitude. When they raged, they bowed their heads and waited for forgiveness. It was not a religion as we would recognize it, more an unspoken agreement between the living and the unseen world that surrounded them. Life, for the Neolithic farmer, existed between opposites: plenty and hunger, calm and flood, silence and loss. And yet, there was beauty in this rhythm. In the quiet mornings, before work, they would stand at the edge of their fields and watch the mist drift low over the river. The world seemed vast and unchanging, and for a moment, time itself felt still. These were not people who sought greatness. They sought continuation, the act of planting, of tending, of feeding one's family. That was enough. It was their form of hope, but even hope had its limits. Some years, disease came not from famine but from still water, from insects, from rot, from invisible things that crept into the body. They did not understand what caused it, only that it came after floods or in long stretches of heat. They would watch neighbors grow weak, children fade, elders fall silent. Death was not a stranger. It was part of the cycle, accepted, but never welcome. Graves were shallow, marked by simple stones, sometimes with a vessel of food placed beside the body. An act of kindness for the journey beyond. They believed, perhaps, that no one should travel hungry. Despite it all, the community endured. It was endurance that defined them, not conquest, not innovation, but quiet persistence. When the soil grew tired, they moved a little farther upstream. When disaster struck, they rebuilt with hands that never forgot what had been lost. Their lives were humble, yet in their simplicity, they carried the seed of everything that would come after. The great cities of China, the bronze artisans, the poets, the emperors, all of them were descendants of these faceless, nameless farmers who once bent over the Yellow River's muddy banks and placed seeds into the earth. At night, when the moon rose over the valley and the fires burned low, one could almost sense the timelessness of their world. The same stars that watched over them still shine above us now, silent witnesses to millennia of human endurance. The sound of the river remains, softer now tamed by dams and walls. But somewhere in its flow there is still the echo of those first farmers, their bare feet pressing into wet soil, their lives woven into the rhythm of the land. Theirs was not a story of glory, but of quiet resilience. And as the centuries moved forward, their persistence laid the foundation for everything that followed for the rise of villages. The first pottery kilns, the first shrines to ancestors. The age of endless toil would slowly give way to the age of organized life. The birth of civilization itself. And so, from this long struggle between man and river, between hunger and harvest, between silence and song, we drift gently onward toward the birth of community, the shaping of the first villages along the Yellow River, and the slow awakening of human order amid the wild. The story of early civilization along the Yellow River begins not with conquest or empire, but with silence. It begins with the steady hum of insects in the tall grass, the rustling of reeds along the banks, and the murmur of water moving endlessly eastward. The river's surface caught the light of dawn like a long ribbon of bronze, shimmering gently beneath a haze of early morning mist. For the people who lived along its edge, this was not just scenery, it was bread. It was time itself, flowing quietly, patiently, always returning. Long before walls or temples, before the idea of kings or soldiers, there were small families scattered across this valley, fishermen, gatherers, and planters of wild millet. They built their homes from what the earth offered: clay, reeds, straw, and patience. Their houses were round, half-sunken into the ground, warm in winter, cool in summer. Smoke curled gently from the roof holes each morning, carrying the smell of damp firewood and boiling porridge into the cool air. To wake here was to wake in rhythm with the land. The men would rise first, their shadows stretching long in the soft light. They would move quietly, tying sandals made of twisted grass, gathering their stone hoes, and walking toward the open fields that bordered the slow curve of the river. The women would follow, some carrying infants wrapped against their chests, others tending to fires, grinding grain on heavy stones, or shaping clay for new pots. The soundscape of the morning was steady and soft, a rhythmic thud of pestles, the low chatter of voices, the bark of a distant dog. No one hurried. Life had no clocks yet. The river was the heart of everything. It was the provider and the destroyer. In its generosity, it flooded and left behind dark soil that could feed the living for months. In its anger, it rose too high, too fast, and erased what it had given. The people did not fight it. They watched, they waited, and they learned. In the rhythm of those floods, they began to understand patterns how the moon as pole and the sun as heat danced together to shape the seasons. And from that understanding, the first calendars were born. Though they were carved not in stone but in memory, they learned that to survive here meant surrendering to balance. Too much labor in the heat, and the body weakened. Too much trust in the calm river, and the flood would teach humility. So they lived with restraint. The people of these early villages built their days around endurance rather than ambition. There was beauty in their stillness, and wisdom in their simplicity. When you imagine them, imagine not noise or chaos, but the quiet constancy of work, the slow swing of a hoe, the creak of wood, the sigh of wind through millet stalks. Imagine the warmth of sun on the back of the neck, the faint taste of salt on cracked lips, the grain dust clinging to sweat. Theirs was a life measured by touch and sound, by repetition that shaped the soul. Hirchebening as the sun slipped behind the low hills, the lights softened into amber, the fields turned gold, and the river reflected the color of fading fire. People gathered around small hearths near their huts. They shared grain cakes, dried fish, and small cups of fermented millet drink. Children laughed. Elders spoke softly. The stories they told were not written yet, but they carried the essence of what would one day become myth. Tales of dragons sleeping beneath the river, of spirits guiding the floods, of ancestors who whispered through the wind. It was in these stories that culture first took root. The people began to decorate their tools, to paint their pots, to carve symbols into bone. They did not yet write, but they recorded. A swirl of lines could mean rain, a cross might mean a gathering place, a pair of dots could mean life or fertility. Art and survival were the same act. Every line carried a memory, every object a fragment of identity. In these small gestures, painting a pot, building a hearth, mending a roof, the first civilizations began, not through kings or war, but through repetition and care, through the shared effort of making life slightly better each day. And so, the river people became something new. Not just survivors, but builders of continuity. When they buried their dead, they placed food in pots beside them, shaped with tenderness and patience. It was a quiet acknowledgement that life continued elsewhere, that the cycle did not end in soil but flowed onward like the river itself. The floodplain was their world, and in it they learned the laws of balance that would one day define all of Chinese civilization. Harmony between heaven and earth, order in the midst of chaos, reverence for the unseen. It was here, beside the river, that these values were born not as philosophy, but as necessity. At night, the stars reflected faintly in the slow-moving water. The constellations became companions, the guiding points by which the villagers marked planting and harvest. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled a low, steady sound that merged with the rustling of reeds. And, over it all, the gentle sound of the river whispered what the people already knew in their bones. Nothing endures without patience. They would rise again tomorrow, and the rhythm would begin again. Over generations, the small villages along the Yellow River began to grow first slowly, then steadily. What began as scattered huts turned into clusters, then into communities linked by kinship, trade, and shared memory. Smoke from hearths rose across the plain like signals from one life to another. Paths began to form between settlements, worn trails through tall grass and shallow streams, connecting the living in a network of quiet cooperation. Each generation built upon the labor of the one before. The elders remembered floods and droughts. The young learned from those memories. The river was no longer just a force of nature, it was a story passed down through voices, songs, and patterns of planting. Each field became a page in that story, each harvest a verse. As time went on, specialization began to appear. Some villagers were better at shaping clay, others at weaving baskets, others at watching the stars. Roles began to form, not rigid, but recognized. The potter's hands grew smoother, the farmer's back stronger, the watcher's eyes keener. And from this division of labor came the first faint traces of social order, not born from dominance, but from necessity and trust. Trade became the heartbeat of early civilization. Villages exchanged tools for grain, pottery for salt, shells for obsidian. Across muddy trails and shallow rivers, goods passed hand to hand, but what truly traveled were ideas. A new way to fire clay, a better design for a hoe, a new pattern to weave into baskets. Knowledge became the most valuable commodity of all. Slowly, humanity began to evolve, not just through survival, but through sharing. Rituals also grew more complex. Once simple offerings of grain became ceremonies marked by song, fire, and the rhythm of drums made from hollowed wood. People gathered to mark the passing of seasons, the planting of seeds, the first rain, the ripening of grain. These rituals gave shape to time. They made life predictable, even sacred. The villagers no longer lived with the river, they lived within its rhythm. But harmony was never permanent. Some years, the rains did not come. The ground cracked. The crops withered. The river shrank to a sluggish thread, heavy with silt. In those years, the people grew quiet. They prayed harder. They sacrificed a portion of their harvest to the unseen gods of water and wind. And when even that failed, they moved, packing their tools, their few possessions, their children, and following the river downstream to where the earth still breathed. These moments, slow and cyclical, gave rise to the first sense of continuity between settlements. The people who once saw themselves as separate now realized they were connected by a shared fate. The Yellow River did not belong to one village, but to all. In this way, geography gave birth to identity. With time, villages learned to adapt to the river's moods. They built embankments and dikes of packed earth, crude but effective. They dug channels to control floods and lead water to dry fields. This was the first engineering, not grand, but profoundly human. The mind of civilization was awakening, one muddy shovel of earth at a time. When night came, the work paused and reflection began. Families sat outside their huts, gazing toward the dark outline of the hills. The air smelled of smoke and wet soil. Fireflies drifted lazily among the reeds. The elders spoke softly, their voices carrying the wisdom of repetition. The river gives. The river takes. We endure. From these murmurs emerged something greater than Sevilla philosophy. It was not written, not named, but lived. The people of the Yellow River learned the truth that still echoes through Chinese thought. That balance, endurance, and respect for the natural world are the roots of peace. And so, as centuries passed, the villages became the first civilizations. The Piligong, the Yangsha, the Longshanol, names that would one day appear in history books. But for them, they were simply homes by the river. Each one carried forward the same quiet knowledge that humanity and the earth must move in harmony, not opposition. Imagine the calm of those evenings, the soft glow of firelight inside clay huts, the faint hum of crickets, the river murmuring just beyond the fields. The stars hung low and familiar, and for a brief moment, everything in the world seemed perfectly still. In that stillness, civilization was being born not with trumpets or monuments, but with patience, breath, and the rhythm of life itself. The world of the early Shan Kingdom was a place of quiet dread and steady wonder. Life had structured now feels. Walls, market spat. The universe still felt unpredictable. Floods came without reason. Crops failed under perfect skies. And sometimes a sickness would sweep through the villages like a silent wind. Two people. These events were not random. They were messages. Something beyond the visible world was trying to speak. The question was, how could one listen? In the smoky chambers of the king's compound, that question found its answer in fire. The diviner's serious men robed in simple linen would take the shoulder bones of oxen or the broad shells of turtles and polish them until smooth. The surfaces gleamed faintly in the dim light, the pale color almost like old ivory. Onto them, the diviners carved questions. Will the harvest be good? Will Tekina's child survive? Should we make war? Each incision was deliberate, slow, and filled with reverence. They were not writing yet, not as we understand it, but their marks held meaning, and that meaning held power. When the carving was complete, the diviner would place the bone above the coals. The room grew warmer, shadows flickering along the walls, the scent of smoke heavy and earthy. He would wait until the heat pressed against the bone, until it began to dry and tighten. Then a sounder. Small, sharp. Crack. The lines spread across the surface like the veins of a leaf. In those lines, Tebelibeth, the ancestors answered. The heat did not destroy the bone. Irrevealed, Italiano. The diviner leaned close, reading the patterns as though reading the stars. His voice, low and careful, filled the chamber. Yes, he might whisper, or no. Sometimes danger, sometimes only silence. Around him, the attendants watched, their eyes lowered. In that moment, the entire kingdom seemed to breathe in unison, waiting for a single word from the past. When the ritual ended, the bone was not discarded. It was cleaned, inked, and stored. On its surface, another mark was carved, a record of the result. It rained. The king's hunt succeeded. The child lived. Each bone became a small archive of hope and fear. Over time, they formed a collection, hundreds, then thousands of bones each, a moment frozen in the act of asking. Even now, millennia later, when archaeologists uncovered them in the dust near the old capital of the Shang, the bones still carried the faint scent of soot. Many still bore their original writing, clear as if freshly carved. They spoke again, across time, each one a whisper from 3,000 years ago, answering questions no one remembered asking. But to the people of that age, these were not curiosities. They were bridges. The bones connected the living with the dead, the human with the divine. When the cracks formed, it was as if heaven itself bent close to reply. The people believed that the ancestors were watching, that the spirits of kings long gone still guided the living. To live rightly, one had to listen. That was the heart of the ritual. Not power, but connection. In a world of uncertainty, the oracle bones offered a fragile kind of comfort. They made the invisible visible, the unknowable tangible. And in that fragile comfort, civilization found its first form of written thought. By firelight, those early marks began to take shape into something greater. Symbols repeated, patterns formed. Alignment sun, a curve meant rain. A pair of lines meant harvest. The diviners began to notice that they could record not just the answer but the question itself. Slowly, the first Chinese script emerged from the smoke. It was the birth of writing, and it began not with commerce or poetry, but with prayer. Imagine that. Humanity's first written words were questions to the universe, not commands, not declarations, questions. It is humbling to think that our oldest surviving sentences are not about conquest or victory, but about uncertainty, about rain, about life and death, about whether the gods still cared. That humility gave shape to an entire culture, one that found beauty in restraint, reverence in silence, and wisdom in patience. The oracle bones became more than a ritual. They became history's first mirror. When the Shang kings looked into them, they did not just seek omens, they saw themselves reflected in the questions they asked, and what they saw was the fragile humanity behind the crown. As generations passed, the ritual of divination grew refined. The diviners became officials. The bones became scrolls of bone and shell, neatly arranged in underground chambers, cataloged by topic and date. The questions of daily life turned into records of policy, ceremony, and dreams. Writing was no longer just for the divine. It was for the state. The Shang kings relied on these bones to rule. Before a campaign, the king would ask, "Shall we attack the Yi in the east?" Before a ceremony, will the ancestors bless the offering? The answers, drawn from cracks and smoke, would determine the fate of armies. In this way, writing became power. To hold the brush oar, the knife that carved the question, was to stand between the people and the heavens. The diviners became keepers of truth. They were priests, scholars, scientists, and scribes, all at once, and through them, the voice of the ancestors became the voice of the king. Each bone recorded more than its question, it captured a moment in time. The date, the diviner's name, even the outcome. The writing grew complex, the strokes. The earliest form of Chinese characters emerged sharp, angular, precise, as if still remembering the edge of the blade that first inscribed them. These marks became the foundation of one of the world's most enduring scripts. Yet, beneath the formality, the bones remain deeply human. Among the royal decrees and omens, there are bones that ask questions no king could command. Will the queen bear a healthy child? Should we seek a cure for the swelling of the foot? Will there be peace in the 7th month? These were not the words of power, they were words of worry. Proof that even those who ruled still feared the silence of heaven. When you picture those ancient nights, imagine the stillness. The low hum of insects outside the walls. The slow crackle of the fire. A figure bent over a bone, carving carefully, whispering softly. Around him, others wait. The smell of smoke, thick in the air. Outside, the fields sleep under the moon. The river flows in its dark rhythm, and somewhere, beyond the stars, the ancestors listen. That quiet scene would shape the future of an empire. From those bones came written law, literature, philosophy. From those small whispers came the chronicles of dynasties and the poems of sages. The oracle bones were the first heartbeat of written China, and through them, humanity began to remember itself. In later centuries, the practice faded, replaced by brush and ink. The Bronze Age turned to iron, kings to emperors, rituals to ceremonies. But the memory of those bones lingered in the shape of every written word, in the rhythm of thought itself. Even now, when a modern calligrapher lifts his brush and begins a stroke. The gesture echoes the diviner's, and the same balance, the same care, the same reverence for line and meaning. Every character still carries the pulse of the past. When archaeologists rediscovered the oracle bones in the late 19th century used, ironically, as dragon bones in traditional medicine, China was astonished to find that its written language had not changed beyond recognition. The symbols carved 3 millennia earlier were still legible to scholars. The line between the living and the dead had remained unbroken. That continuity is something unique in the human story. It means that the questions once whispered into firelight can still be read today. It means that the living still understand the voices of their ancestors. And it means that writing, at its core, is not a technology, it is a form of remembrance. The oracle bones remind us that history did not begin with battles or monuments. It began with listening, with the simple act of asking the world what it means. The Shang people asked their ancestors for guidance, but in truth, they were beginning to hear themselves. Their questions became symbols. Their symbols became stories. Their stories became civilization. And as the fire faded, as the night deepened over the valley of the Yellow River, the bones cooled in silence. The cracks hardened. The marks remained. The world would change. Dynasties would rise and fall. But the questions stay small, trembling questions carved by hands, long gone, would endure forever. Because in the end, all writing begins with a question, and every question is a bridge between fear and faith. Dawn does not break in a Bronze Age village. It seeps in, a slow, silver wash spilling across the fields, soft as breath. The mists of the Yellow River rise first, curling through the reeds and low shrubs, carrying the scent of mud, smoke, and life. Somewhere in that pale gray stillness, a rooster gives its hesitant cry. Then another answers. Then silence again. The first movement comes from the hearths. Someone stirs the ashes. The fire groans softly. A living thing half asleep. A thin ribbon of smoke rises through the hole in the roof, carrying the first warmth of morning into the blue-white air. Inside Diute's round, low, built from packed clay and straw. People begin to wake. They do not speak yet. Waking is slow, quiet, respectful. The night is not something to banish, but to part with gently. A woman kneels by the fire. She blows into the embers until a tiny flame appears, licking upward, gold and trembling. She sets a pot over it, rough, handmade, its rim chipped from years of use, and pours in water. The sound of water striking the clay echoes like a heartbeat in the small space. She adds a handful of millet, stirs once with a wooden spoon, and waits. Outside, the world is soft, wrapped in the thin hush of dawn. Chickens shuffle near the doorway. A dog shakes off sleep, its collar of twine scratching faintly. From the distance, the faint sound of the river murmurs, low and unearthly. By the time the sun clears the mist, the village is awake. Men gather near the fields, lean, quiet figures with sun-browned faces and hands hardened by years of work. They carry tools with bronze heads, small, precious things forged in secret fires, cooled in the river's edge, sharpened by patience. Bronze is rare, half magic, half miracle. Each piece represents a chain of skill and exchange. Miners far away, smelters, traders, craftsmen. Each tool holds the work of a dozen unknown lives. They carry them the way priests carry relics. The first strike of the hoe into the wet soil is heavy, resonant. It is a sound the earth knows well. Soon others join in. A slow, unbroken rhythm, thud, drag, lift, breathe. The sound merges with the wind, with the rustle of reeds, with the faint hum of insects waking. There are no overseers, no kings, no recorded orders, only necessity, a kind of faith older than gods. Each man works with his own pace, his own rhythm. Sometimes they sing low, half amid, the kind of tune that does not need words. A song passed from father to son, changing shape each generation but never quite disappearing. The sun climbs higher, the air warms. The smell of soil and sweat thickens. By midday, they rest. They gather in the shadow of a willow near the riverbank, where the ground is cool. The women arrive, carrying bowls of porridge, dried fish, pickled roots. They eat in silence. The sound of chewing, of water being poured, of cloth brushing against grass. These become the conversation. Children run through the shallows, their laughter like birdsong. Dogs follow, snapping playfully at their heels. An old man sits near the edge, bending a net with fingers trembling but sure. Each knot is a memory, tied in rhythm with his breath. After a heating, some nap beneath the trees. Others sit and watch the clouds drift by slow, shapeless, endless. In those long pauses between work, thought wanders. One might look across the fields and wonder how many seasons remain before his back will bend for good. Another might remember a mother long gone, her voice like wind across water. They do not speak these things, but silence holds them, as gently as the river holds its silt. By late afternoon, the world glows gold. The light rests low across the huts, making the thatched roofs shimmer. Smoke begins to rise again from the hearths, curling lazily upward. The women prepare dinner, boiling millet, roasting fish, stirring fermented vegetables. The smell carries through the village, rich and familiar. A potter sits beside his wheel. The wheel is too modern a word. It is simply a disc of stone, spun by hand or by foot, steady and patient. He shapes the clay, pressing, pulling, smoothing. Each motion deliberate, rhythmic, almost meditative. His tools are simple: a reed for cutting, a shell for smoothing, a thumb for marking. Sometimes he speaks to the clay as he works, asking it to behave, to take the right shape. The pots dry in the shade before being baked in a pit filled with reeds and charcoal. The fire burns slow and smoky, turning the vessels a mottled red. When finished, each one bears small imperfections: a thumbprint, a smudge, a faint line where ash touched too long. These flaws are not mistakes, they are signatures of being human. The finished pots are placed near the entrance of the hut, ready to store grain, oil, or water. Some will be buried one day with their owners as companions for the next world. Because here, life and death are not opposites. They are neighbors who share a fence. When night falls, it comes quickly. The last light drains from the sky, leaving the fields shadowed and still. The river turns dark and glassy. The wind cools, carrying the faint cry of birds returning to their nests. One by one, the huts begin to glow from within, soft orange halos against the deepening blue. The air is filled with sound again. The low crackle of fire, the distant murmur of voices, the high chirp of crickets. Together, they create something like music, the kind that soothes rather than stirs. Inside one hut, a family gathers around the central hearth. The fire flickers, throwing their shadows high against the walls. A child leans against her mother's arm, eyes half. The mother hums softly, stirring a pot one last time before setting it aside. Her husband carves a small wooden tool, smoothing the handle with slow, even strokes. Outside, an old woman sits alone near the doorway, watching the stars appear one by one. She does not count them. She knows them all by feel. Some, she believes, are the souls of ancestors, watching, listening, waiting. She whispers a small prayer, though not to any god, just a greeting to those who came before. Across the village, others do the same. A fisherman hangs his net to dry, touching the cords gently as if they were fragile. A group of young men tend to the fire pit, heating bronze fragments, melting them down for tools. Sparks leap upward. Brief, golden lives that vanish into night. To them, this process is sacred. Bronze is not simply metal. It is transformation. It is fire conquering earth. They whisper as they work, their faces lit orange and gold. In those whispers, you can almost hear the beginning of religion, because belief, in its first form, was not about gods. It was about awe. And yet, even in this calm, the world was already changing. Somewhere far beyond these quiet fields, kings were rising. Armies were forming. Great rivers were being dammed and redirected. Bronze, once sacred, was becoming weapon. But here, in this small, nameless village. Time remained slow. The villagers did not yet know they stood at the edge of something vast. They did not know that one day their pots, their tools, their bones would be unearthed by strangers and displayed beneath glass. They did not know that their silence would one day speak for them. Near midnight, the fires burn low. The village sleeps. The air is thick with the smell of smoke and damp clay. The moon casts pale light across the thatched roofs, making them look almost silver. Dogs twitch in their sleep. A child murmurs softly, dreaming of something she will forget by morning. In the darkness, the wind moves through the grass, whispering softly. The sound is gentle, almost like a voice. If you listen long enough, you might imagine it saying the same thing. The ancestors once told their children that everything will return, that the river will flood and reseed, that the seed will die and live again, that nothing is lost, not truly. And for now, that is enough. Morning will come again, and with it, another fire, another harvest, another bowl of millet, another quiet day in a world that still believes time will last forever. The calm before empire lingers, unbroken. The stars above hold their silence, and the story of humanity, patient, fragile, enduring, continues to turn beneath them. The night is vast now. The fires are cold, and across what was once a cluster of huts, beside a quiet river, there is nothing left but earth. Pressed flat by centuries of rain, covered by grass, watched over by the same indifferent stars. Somewhere beneath that soil lies a broken pot, the imprint of a thumb still faint upon its rim, the ashes of an old hearth, a piece of bronze too small to use, but too precious to throw away. They sleep together in the dark, waiting for the next age to find them. The story of these people, the Neolithic farmers, the first villagers, the makers of oracle bones, the potters of the Bronze Age, has not vanished. It has only changed form, because history does not disappear. It becomes the dust that feeds the next seed. When we think of ancient China, we imagine dynasties, emperors, armies, and silk. But before the gold, there was clay. Before the script, there were whispers. Before Empire, there was silence. The rhythm of their lives was slow, repeating, and almost circular, like the cycle of the seasons, or the steady beat of a drum you can only hear in your bones. They did not chase progress, as we do. They did not rush to outpace time. They worked, they rested, they buried their dead, they sang, they built, and they waited for rain. That was enough. The farmers of the floodplain, who bent their backs to the yellow river, did not know they were shaping a civilization. They only knew the feel of the soil beneath their fingers, the sting of wind on their faces, and the hum of insects before a storm. Their world was both fragile and eternal. Each harvest could fail. Each flood could erase the work of a lifetime. Yet somehow, the seed always returned. There is a quiet courage in that. The courage of those who endure without glory. The kind that never makes it into chronicles or poems, but builds the foundation on which all empires stand. Without them, there would be no kings, no walls, no writing, no belief. Only silence, the vast, empty silence of a world without memory. Centuries later, the oracle bones would whisper their first questions into that silence. A crack in the shell, a mark burned into bone, the beginning of language as a bridge to the unseen. Those marks were not just writing, they were hope etched in fire, a way to speak to what was beyond comprehension, a plea for rain, for children, for peace. And even now, thousands of years later, we are still asking the same things, still speaking into the dark, hoping so men or something will answer. The Bronze Age potter, kneeling by his fire, could never have imagined the machines that would come. The empires, the cities, the noise. He only knew the steady patience of shaping clay, the comfort of watching foam emerge from formlessness. In that slow craft, there is something deeply human. The desire to leave a mark, to turn nothing into something, to leave behind a trace that says, I was here. And perhaps, after all these ages, that is what history really is. a conversation between the living and the dead, a quiet voice beneath the roar of time, saying simply, "Remember me." The calm before empires did not last. It never did us. The small villages along the river grew. The huts became towns, then cities. Kings rose and fell. Wars came. Temples were built, burned, and rebuilt. The bronze tools became bronze blades. And yet, through it all, the rhythm of human life remained much the same. We wake, we work, we love, we mourn, we dream. We build things that crumble. And from the ruins, we build again. If you close your eyes now and listen to the quiet of your own room, you might almost hear them. The distant echo of hose striking earth, of water being poured into clay pots, of a mother's soft song drifting through the dark. They are not gone. They are part of the same silence that surrounds you. The same air. The same heartbeat of time. History does not end when the book closes. It lingers in the dust, into breath, in the spaces between stars. Imagine, for a moment, the entire span of human existence as a single river. Vast, winding, endless. You are standing on its surface, looking down. Beneath you, the current carries the ghosts of every generation. Farmers, builders, poets, soldiers, children. Their dreams flow past like silt in the water. Each of them once thought their moment would last forever. Each of them once felt the warmth of a fire, the hunger of a morning, the comfort of belonging. And each of them, in time, became part of the current. Now, you stand where they once stood, breathing the same air, beneath the same sky. Civilization, for all its pride, is still a fragile thing. A few bad harvests, a shift in the river, a silence in the sky, and it all can vanish. But what endures is not the stone, nor the bronze, nor the writing. What endures is the rhythm, the persistence, the quiet will to continue, even when everything else falls away. The same will that made a woman kneel to light her fire, that made a man sow his field despite the floods, that made a potter shape clay by starlight, that made a scribe carve a question into bone. That same rhythm beats in you. And so, as this long night comes to an end, and the story folds back into silence, remember this: you are part of something ancient, something unbroken. The same patience, the same hunger, the same wonder that shaped the first civilizations still moves quietly beneath your skin. We are not separate from history. We are its continuation, the breath after the pause, the next ripple in the river. The fields may have turned to dust. The villages may have vanished, but the memory remains not in ruins, not in books, but in us. So as you rest now, as your thoughts drift like smoke and your breathing slows, imagine the calm of those distant fields, the steady hum of insects, the warmth of a hearth, the quiet heartbeat of a world not yet divided by noise or speed. The world where history began, not with conquest or kings, but with hands in the soil and faith in the morning. Thank you for staying through this quiet journey through time. If you wish to travel again across forgotten worlds, silent MPS, and the soft corners of history, you can join us by subscribing. Each story we tell is another ripple in that same great river, and somewhere in its depths, perhaps a part of you will remember. Good night, and may your dreams carry you gently back to the beginning.